Well, joining me for the Wednesday panel is Liberal Senator James Paterson and Labor Senator Deb O'Neill. Thank you for joining me.
Nice to be here with you, Jane.
Deb, we'll start with you. So the coronavirus knock-on effects are being felt really far and wide in the economy. We've seen a sell-off on the share market. The construction industry is already saying that it is feeling the effects. Are we at risk of a recession here?
Well, one thing I think we should be very concerned about is the capacity of the government to deal with that, if that eventuality should become part of the Australian economy, because we saw during the summer that when a crisis hits this country, the Prime Minister's not only missing in action, but there is no preparedness. And that's what concerns me about the current government and whatever might be coming down the line.
It does sound like, from what we're hearing from Greg Hunt, from Scott Morrison, putting aside the criticism over his initial handling of the bushfires, that when it comes to the coronavirus, that there are plans in place, at least if a pandemic is declared.
So I think we need to separate these two things out. Dr. Brendan Murphy and I know his Minister Hunt have just given a press conference, and we stand ready as the alternative party of government to work very carefully with the government to make sure that Australians are protected. But this is a government that has failed the economy. They've been elected on a promise of jobs and growth. They've delivered neither. In fact, the economy's been tanking. And we've been telling them for a very, very long time that they need to put some stimulus into the economy. We've given them a suite of options, increase New Start, increase incentives to business, bring forward a part of stage 2 of the tax cuts, bring forward infrastructure spends. And I can tell you from my tours around New South Wales that there's a $200 million investment that's needed to connect Wellington to Dubbo. There, people are crying out in the country for this government to invest, and they have ignored all that. They're sitting on their hands, just like before the summer when they said, look, there's no emergency here, it'll be fine. This government simply doesn't understand that proper leadership involves planning, and they are letting the economy down, and it's their fault that I don't think the ACDC track will come true. They're back in black, and they're trying to pedal away from that despite the Treasurer's claims. What do you say? Tonight I announced the budget is back in black and Australia is back on track. Well, that's the test they set themselves.
We heard that just a moment ago. James Paterson, right of reply here. Should the government be looking at stimulus measures, given that already the government seems to be walking away from the surplus? It only looks like things might be getting worse from here.
John, I think we should take at least one deep breath and wait at least 30 seconds before we jump into the partisan attacks on the government, when we're actually facing quite a serious challenge here. And I think what most of your viewers and most Australians want to know is to be reassured that the plans that we have are in place, and that if the coronavirus does become more serious, as it looks like it could, that we're able to respond to that. So I actually think Deb's done a bit of a disservice there by raising the prospect that we don't have those plans in place, that we're not well equipped to do that. That's actually not true at all. And I think you just saw...
I agree. The health area is one area where, there's just been a very good press conference. That is not what's in debate. It's about whether the economy is prepared on your watch. And I want to be very, very clear about that.
I appreciate that you clarified that, because I think Australian people should be reassured that although this is a very serious global challenge, if it does come more to our shores, that we will be very well equipped to respond to it. We are a very sophisticated, very rich 21st century economy. We've got an outstanding health system, and we have been planning for weeks now what should happen if it gets to our shores. So Australians can be reassured about that. Yes, it may also have a significant effect on the economy. And these are what some economists sometimes refer to as a black swan event. They're the sort of things that you can't ever predict or anticipate. You know that they might happen, but you don't know what will happen, when it will happen, or how severe that impact will be. And the only thing that we can do to prepare for those things is to be as fiscally prudent and conservative as we can, so that if that time comes and if the government needs to step in, it has the capacity to do so. What would be irresponsible would have been in the past to have been fiscally loose and reckless, and then not been well equipped as we are today to respond.
Yeah, well, clearly the situation has changed since last year's budget. You've got to adapt to the change. So when it comes to stimulus, is this something the government should be seriously considering investing more in infrastructure, or, as Deb mentioned, possible rise in the New Start allowance?
I think that's a bit premature. We're not yet at that point. And at the moment, Treasury is doing some really sophisticated modelling, trying to anticipate what the impact will be. But actually, of course, you just need more information before you can be confident about that. So I think the government should just be, as it is already, calm and watch and wait and see and evaluate the events as they take hold.
Okay, well, looking at the practicalities of the coronavirus outbreak, we know that at the moment there's a travel ban on anybody coming from mainland China. Given we know this virus is spreading, Deb, do you think that there's any merit in extending the travel ban to other countries?
Look, I think that we're politicians here sitting with you, a journalist in a studio in Canberra. I think that Dr. Brendan Murphy has proven his his mettle already in the way that it's been managed so far. And I think that we should be listening very carefully to considered advice around our practical action. So I'm guided by the experts in this, and I do believe that we have great medical capacity in this country and we have amazing leadership in the medical field. They're the ones who know, and I think we should follow their advice. And I think it's very important for Australians that we operate that particular part of the challenge in an entirely bipartisan way. People need to be reassured about their physical health and safety. The economy, that's an entirely different matter. And we've been discussing that somewhat already.
And James Paterson, do you have a view on the travel ban? Do you think it's likely that it will be extended, or is it spreading to so many countries now that the travel ban is really ineffective?
Well, the government acted quicker than almost any other country in the world and has put in place tougher restrictions than almost any other country in the world. And that's one of the reasons why, despite the fact that Australia has extraordinary exposure to China, that we've actually had incredibly few cases of coronavirus. Some of the other countries who've been impacted are actually far less directly impacted in relations with China than we are, but they've had many higher cases. I think we should leave all options open and leave all options on the table. And if the medical advice indicates that some of these third countries, which now appear to be becoming quite hotspots for transmission of the virus, need to be quarantined as well, then I think we should do that.
Okay, now just back on the budget surplus issue, this is an issue that is very political. I don't think a lot of voters really, decide their futures depending on a surplus. But the coalition was so critical of Labor for promising a surplus and then not delivering it. But isn't that effectively what your government is now doing, if indeed the surplus is not delivered?
Jane, I'm a budget surplus hardliner. I think almost in every circumstances we should deliver a budget surplus, or at least strive to do so. And I think over the last 15 years, both parties should have done more to deliver more budget surpluses than we have. But even I recognise that when you have in a row 3 fairly unprecedented crises in the terms of an ongoing severe drought, major bushfires and now coronavirus, that some things are going to come under serious strain. And the budget is clearly
what
one of them.
When what happened to GFC? Sorry, I don't want to make Labor's point. However, that is a fair point.
What about the GFC? The one that didn't exist according to the Liberal Party.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair point, isn't it? That Labor also had an economic shock that nobody could really predict.
That's right, but Labor made decisions in response to that economic shock that we were very critical of at the time. We think they went far too hard and too fast on stimulus. It was excessive, and that contributed to the budget deterioration, and it prevented them from returning the budget to surplus more quickly than they could have. That was an option available to them, and they deserve to be held to account for the decisions that they made, and I expect that we will equally be held to account for the decisions that we will make over the coming months.
We were the only economy that didn't go into recession.
That's not quite
and that
right.
was a black swan event of the kind that you were describing before, and the government has continued to deny it. So, according to the Liberal mantra, it doesn't matter what's going on in the world, you must deliver a surplus. And if you've already declared that you've got one, and I will repeat the Treasurer's words, tonight I announce the budget is back in black, excuse me, and Australia is back on track. Like, I'm nearly choking on the words because that was a serious misrepresentation of the reality then. It's a perfect example of Mr Morrison's magic marketing words, and he campaigned on the back of that, which is not the case. And now that the government think that they might be in trouble in May in delivering that surplus, the test that they set themselves, the claim that they made they'd already achieved, we are seeing backpedalling that would make them eligible for a competition if it was at an Olympic level.
Yes, well, we'll find out in May what the final budget figures are. But moving on from budget, the other big topic that has been dominating this week is energy and emissions policy. James Paterson, I wanted to ask you about your former leader Malcolm Turnbull's comments. He wants Parliament to stop the false debate, in his words, that a target of net zero emissions by 2050 is optional. Is it inevitable that we are going to adopt this target as a country?
I don't think it's necessarily inevitable, and all I can note when it comes to Malcolm Turnbull's post-political pronouncements is that they are quite different to what he was saying when he was Prime Minister, when he was here in the building. The kind of rhetoric that he is espousing on climate change now is much more radical than it was before. In fact, in his support for a Green New Deal, which was originally proposed by a radical left Democrat in the United States and is supported here in Australia by Adam Bant, he's not only out of step with the Liberal Party, but he's out of step with the Labor Party as well, and as a position to the furthest on the political left.
All right, well, that's your commentary of Malcolm Turnbull's post-political career, but the 2050 target, there does seem to be a split between the Liberal Party and the National Party. The Liberals are keeping their options open as far as the Prime Minister's rhetoric is concerned, but the Nationals have come out very strongly against it. Should the government be adopting this as a target when your representatives go to Glasgow at the end of the year?
My view is that the most important targets are ones that we can actually deliver on and actually be measured on and be held to account by the voting public, and they are our short and medium term targets. And I think so particularly important is the 2030 target. Now, anyone in this building, and particularly those in the Labor Party, who are absolutely sure they can tell you what should happen by 2050, but will not be drawn on what should happen by 2030, I don't think should be taken very seriously.
True, but you are in government, so you're the ones that are going to be held accountable at this time. But the 2050 target, are you saying that the government should be wary of adopting that longer term target?
My view is, as I said, I think that our short term and medium term targets out to 2030 are much more important priority than 2050.
All right, well, Deb O'Neill, we know that Labor has locked in behind this target, which was actually an election promise of Labor's. But the party, as we saw with last year's election, has always had this challenge in having an ambitious climate change policy while also trying to stand up for the blue collar workers. And that was, I think one of the results of the election campaign showed that. So are people in your electorate worried about this kind of climate change policy? Like, how do you allay those concerns?
Well, ask anybody who watched what happened over the summer. Are they concerned about climate change? The Australian people have had the worst summer on record. I fear for the mental health impact of what we've experienced. There has been an awakening because there was no one getting in the way of the truth. People saw the reality. I was at the Gundagai show just not last weekend, the weekend before, speaking with locals who want a transition to great energy that provides jobs where they live. They understand that something has to be done about climate change. They're managing the aftermath of trying to keep their farms going while they were fighting fires. So Australian people have woken up to it. I think James' critique of his own former leader and the announcement of the gap between what they said, what his leader said in government and what he actually said after, gives an indication that this is a government that plays with the truth. They play with a narrative. Well, 2050 as a target is a reality for 73 countries
and it's
around the world.
Concerns about it?
They're not concerned about a number in 2050. They're not concerned about the debate about what should happen. They're sick of the debate. They're sick of 10 years of being told by this government that they've got it all in control. They know this government doesn't have a plan. They know that the summer happened. They know that something's got to happen, and they don't trust the Liberal National Party.
Well, I guess you look at last year's election though, and it appears that climate change is an issue that people are worried about, but doesn't necessarily shift votes. Do you think that has changed now?
Look, I think the magic marketing words of the Prime Minister are falling apart. We're seeing that with the that claim by Mr Frydenberg. Now the government are actually going to, they slipped that one out by accident. Now they're going to be held to account on it. And I think they're going to fail that. They have failed the Australian people. We know that we need to do something. People are telling me all the time as I move across the country, and particularly across the state of New South Wales, they're crying out for leadership. 73 countries around the world have figured this out. The problem with the Liberal National Party, who've been in charge of this country for 3 terms and 7 years, is they still want to play a game. But we cannot continue to play games with people's lives.
Right.
It cost lives over the summer. We cannot continue this nonsense.
Okay, Deb O'Neill, James Paterson, unfortunately we've run out of time, but thank you both for joining me today. We'll